So there's 4 teams today they're saying are in the running for him. J.J. Watt's 32, great defensive lineman, 3-time defensive player of the year. And the teams are the Steelers, the Titans, the Bills, and Cleveland. But only one of those, Green Bay gets mentioned too, only one of them has actual cap space, and that is Cleveland. So, it leads you to believe that Cleveland is the one offering the $15 or $16 million because they can afford it. Now, Cleveland's in a weird spot where they just signed Myles Garrett to a 5-year extension for $125 million, and they also pay Sheldon Richardson, a defensive tackle, $14 million a year. So if they went and got J.J. Watt for $15 to $16 million, they'd be $55 million in on their defensive line. That's a lot of money. Their linebackers are atrocious, and their secondary is a problem. Denzel Ward is talented but hurt a lot. Greedy Williams was hurt last year. He's not a physical player. It's not a terribly intimidating secondary. The linebacking core is bad, and so maybe their feeling is we're just going to overwhelm everybody up front. I think Olivier Vernon's a free agent, so he may not be there, plus he's coming off an injury. So it would be interesting. If you had J.J. Watt, Sheldon Richardson, and Myles Garrett on the defensive line, there's not a lot outside of the 49ers that could really compare to it. It would be Tampa, 49ers, and Cleveland would have overwhelming defensive fronts. Now, some of you may be asking, how can Cleveland keep affording all these guys? But remember, Baker Mayfield, they're not paying anything. Nick Chubb was drafted early. They're not paying anything. So offensive line, Conklin, the right tackle, they're paying, but they've drafted pretty well on the offensive line. So they're not paying a ton for some of their top offensive linemen. They're not paying anything for their running backs. They're definitely not paying anything in the back end of their defense. It's terrible. But so where do you put your money? Cleveland may be just saying, hey, we can't solve our secondary and linebacker issues right in one draft. We can't. So we're going to have the best defensive front in the NFL with Sheldon Richardson, Myles Garrett, who's a monster, and J.J. Watt. And that there's no question. It makes your secondary better. So that may be it leads me to believe when you got these 4 or 5 teams, Pittsburgh, Tennessee, Buffalo, and Green Bay would have to move some deck chairs to make it work. Cleveland could offer $15 million and wouldn't have to make too many sacrifices. What they would do, my guess is they would trade Odell Beckham Jr., who I don't think is a good fit anyway. I would trade Odell Beckham Jr. tomorrow to get a corner, to get somebody's second-best corner, or get another draft pick. I would trade Odell Beckham tomorrow to get a second-round pick. Absolutely. That would give Cleveland a first-round pick. They could use that on a linebacker, which they need desperately, and then a couple of picks in the second round, go to the secondary. This is a very good draft for offensive linemen. Cleveland doesn't need any. Quarterbacks, they're not going to draft it. And I think it's a great draft for corners. I think there's like 7 or 8, 9, 10 really good corners. Cleveland needs that badly. So it's interesting. They're not telling you who leads on J.J. Watt. But multiple sources have said the most lucrative Watt offer on the table is $15 to $16 million. That feels like Cleveland to me. It does. Joy with the news.
No.
Turn on the news. This is the Herd Line News.
He said his 3 priorities were quarterback, personnel, and then money.
I know. I mean, listen, I don't think that's the best place for him. I don't buy the best place for him, to me, emotionally, physically winning is Green Bay. And then, because I don't buy into Big Ben in Pittsburgh.
Right.
I think the second place where he makes a lot of sense is Buffalo. Because
Buffalo, he feels like a Buffalo Bill. He feels like a Packer. He feels like a Bill.
Like, Tennessee sounds good, but if I get Josh Allen and Sean McDermott, really good offense, and it's not Buffalo's secondary's talented, but the problem is they have no pass rush, so their very talented secondary gets burned. Tennessee's secondary is bad, and they have no pass rush.
Tennessee needs him the most.
Yeah, Tennessee needs him the most, but I'm saying to me, Green Bay 1, Buffalo 2 feels like really perfect fits, and he is in both instances the icing. I mean, if I told you J.J. Watt goes to Buffalo, That feels like a 13-win team. Like he solves their primary issue.
Yeah, and we already know what Buffalo is capable of. Like,
yeah.
I just want to see him go a place where I genuinely feel like he has an opportunity to win.
So if he goes to Buffalo, it feels like he solves their primary issue, no pass rush. If he goes to Green Bay, it's like, oh my gosh.
They're finally being aggressive.
If he goes to Cleveland, it's like your linebackers are still bad. You don't know about Baker at quarterback, and the secondary gets banged out. It doesn't feel like he solves the final piece to the Super Bowl puzzle. If J.J. Watt is probably worth half a game in Buffalo, and they won, 11 last year, 12? I mean, Josh Allen's just getting better and better, so Buffalo's hard to argue your way out of.
Yeah, you want him to be the piece that makes them a Super Bowl team.
And that's what it feels like, especially in Buffalo.
Right.
Buffalo's got everything. Buffalo's secondary's fine. You just can't guard guys for 4 seconds.
Well, his former teammate, Deshaun Watson, has been very unhappy with the Texans for months and has made it clear he wants out, but the team plans to keep him and he's going to try and repair the relationship. Deshaun's posted plenty of tweets hinting at his feelings of the situation in the past, and since we are in the middle of this Deshaun Watson watch, everything he tweets and says matters, and he just tweeted this morning. Loyalty is everything. Don't you ever forget it.
Well, what does that mean? Does that mean he should be loyal to Houston?
I don't know what it means. Here's what I love about free agency, and this is what I love about the NBA free agency, and is now happening in the NFL free agency, which is like we follow all these breadcrumbs. Like J.J. Watt tweeted something the other day, and everyone was trying to break down like what it meant. It was very, alluding to cells, like what it means the Bills. Like it might just be a lyric, or it might just be something he's feeling, and it applies to his personal life. Like we don't know, but because we're watching everything these guys do to find out where they go, it matters.
You know what? If I had not forgotten my phone at my hotel today, you know what would be fun today? If you and I both put out a cryptic tweet just today in honor of Deshaun Watson. And it means something to us, but we're not going to tell the audience what it means. Oh, I've got a good one.
Well, we have social media people. I think they have access to your Twitter, don't they?
No, they don't, actually.
They don't?
Nobody has access to them, no.
Oh, wow. Well.
Listen, if I lose a key, I don't have access to my hotel room and a bed tonight, so...
I don't know. I don't know what it means, but we're going to follow every breadcrumb we can with this. So the Celtics have had a disappointing start, 15-17 record as they approach halfway through the season, and both Brad Stevens and Danny Ainge are not in danger of losing their jobs. The team owner said there are guys and we're sticking with them, and that's not even a question in my mind.
Well, who is suggesting that?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of conversations about why the Celtics are struggling and who's to blame for it. Danny Ainge came out last week and said, he's responsible for the roster. So if there's anyone to blame, it's on him. There's been a lot of questions about Brad Stevens. I mean, we talked to Chris Broussard earlier today, and I very much agree with him, but I've been on this since Kyrie. I understand Kyrie is not the necessarily the easiest, most flowing individual to work with, but to Chris, as Chris said, he's not a Ferrari guy. He's a get the most out of your Honda Accord guy. And the NBA is a Ferrari, Lamborghini league. Like, it's a Rolls-Royce league.
No, Doc Rivers.
You got to make it happen.
Yeah, Doc Rivers is really good dealing with the Rolls-Royces. He probably wouldn't be as good with a young team that doesn't have... it is interesting. I think about that. It's really fascinating to think about that. Like, it doesn't really work that way in football and baseball. Like, but in basketball, the culture of basketball, it's so star-driven, where, like, Bobby Knight would have been a disaster in the NBA. John Beilein, a great basketball coach at Michigan, was a disaster in Cleveland. There's been a lot of college football coaches that have gone to the NFL and have succeeded. It's very rare when a college coach can go to the NBA and succeed, because college basketball is about the coach, the NBA is about the player, and it's like, I'll give you a guy who deals with stars well, Frank Vogel.
Yep.
He doesn't have any problem. Like, Frank lost in Indiana and Orlando. He didn't have good enough players. The minute you give him good players, LeBron loves Frank Vogel.
Ty Lue is also great with stars.
Yeah, they love it. So basketball is very unique. There's an argument to be made that Brad Stevens from Butler never dealt with a star, goes to Boston. He's not great with that personality.
I'm not saying he's a bad coach.
No.
Anytime that we're critical of coaches, like, oh, he's a bad coach, he's a good coach, everything doesn't have to be that clear. He may just not be great with stars. And this is a league where you're required to work with stars, or if you're going to win at a high level, you're going to have to work with stars. And I'm not saying that the Celtics roster is a bunch of Honda Accords. It's certainly not. It's actually the opposite of that, and has been the opposite of that, in my opinion. You should be getting much more out of your stars in Boston. And every single year is the same thing. You can't get over the hump. So what is it? Is it that you need another superstar there, or is it that this system isn't necessarily working? I thought what happened with Kyrie was a mixture of Kyrie not fitting in that culture, but also I really believe when you have someone of that level, you got to bend a little bit. You have to make sure everyone knows what their roles are. And it didn't appear that anyone knew what was going on there.
Well, it's the Buck Showalter as a manager was great with young teams. He would get every win out of them. Joe Torre was great with stars because Joe could suppress his ego. I always felt Buck Showalter was a little rigid and could struggle with star-studded teams. Right now, the Dodgers guy, Dave Roberts, a classic example. Everybody likes Dave.
Right.
Everybody. Dodgers have stars everywhere. Dave Roberts can suppress his ego. He's very well liked. You know, Buck Showalter's a great manager. Dave Johnson used to manage the Orioles years ago. Really could squeeze every win out of a roster, but you put him with stars, and it didn't always work. And I think Joe Torre was legendary for he was a decent manager, but